So any tips for the audience if they're looking to find a realtor for condos? Like, what should you look for in a realtor?
Call me. Just kidding.
What is up, you guys? Matt McKeever here with Emma. And so Emma's our condo specialist. You guys know me. I'm an investor from London, Ontario. I know nothing about the Toronto downtown condo scene. Thankfully, Emma does. And so she's on pace to sell 50 condos this year. That's one a week if you're not good at math. And as well, she's essentially grown $1 million business in 3 years by specializing in condos. It sounds like 90% of your clients are buying condos.
Yeah, most of my clients are downtown Toronto here, right in the core. That is my absolute specialty. In
this video, we're going to dive into a whole host of different topics that you need to know if you're going to buy a condo in Toronto. I learned a ton in this video. You guys will too. Buying a condo in Toronto.
If you're buying a condo in Toronto, a couple things that you want to hammer out before you start searching. Obviously, location, your work proximity, and how long you want to travel to work, as unfortunately we're one of the 6 worst for commutes in the world, I guess, or so. So you want to know, are you going to be close to transit, like some form of major transit, which also comes into effect for resale, is something that you're going to want to consider. The closer you are to a major form of transit, the more you're going to pay. Typically, that's kind of like a general rule.
And so like in Toronto, that'd be like a subway station?
Station, yeah. Like if you're going to be next to a subway station, you're going to pay a pretty good premium for that. I think that the bus route is the least desirable. So I think like in the hierarchy of transit would be like subway, streetcar, and then bus. Or like we have GO Transit here as well, right? You can't really go transit around downtown. And the GO Transit is for like
getting to the out,
kind of thing, right? So in terms of downtown commute, travel, subway, streetcar, bus. Let's talk about maintenance fees, I guess, because that's always a big concern for a lot of people is how do I know? I mean, they seem astronomical here. 65 to 75 bucks per square foot is kind of what I look for to keep it in like the industry standard. If you're buying something that's a brand new condo, they usually start them at like 50 to 55 cents per square foot. And then you're like, oh, these maintenance fees are so great. They're leaving themselves a little bit of headroom to like iron out their wrinkles as the building continues to progress. And then I usually find after 5 years, they kind of plateau off a little bit. You're gonna have increases. Your increases are gonna be pretty much at inflation or whatever if your utilities are included, don't be upset at your property manager that they had to raise your maintenance fees because your utilities are included, so they're just passing those costs on to the owner, right? So if you're seeing like 10% increases every year, that's very abnormal, but you know, a 2%, 3% increase in maintenance fees is like relatively normal to see. Don't be like spooked by that or anything like that.
And so, like, when someone's bought the condo, like, how important is it that they be active on their condo board or, like, up to date on that? Like, do you need to stay on top of that?
I find that they do a very good job at keeping people informed, and most condos are very, like, tech-based. So for me, I have, like, an app that I can go on to book the elevator or register your car or whatever, and then also receive notifications. So I feel that most property management companies downtown do a relatively good job in keeping their owners informed. But if you're in a, if you're in a building that doesn't have something that's easy to access, like I think you should be checking in once a month or twice a month on what's going on in the building, right? Like what repairs are coming up, what do I need to be notified about?
And so what are those kind of the 2 key big ones to pay attention to? Just any changes and any major maintenance issues coming up on the horizon? Yeah,
I think so for the most part. I think that people are pretty good at staying on top of the things that are lacking by property managers. There's usually going to be like the 1 or 2 people that you're going to see there all the time, right? But yeah, I think they do a relatively good job of being on top of maintenance issues and whatnot, but just knowing what's going on in the building is always a good thing to know. Like you want to know what's going on in your house, you want to know what's going on in your building, right?
Makes sense. So any other rules of thumb when it comes to kind of Toronto condos that you can share with the audience? Whether it be neighborhoods, prices?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it was last week or the week before, we had 14 days in a row, if I'm not skewing the numbers, 14 days in a row where the average price per square foot was over $1,000 per square foot in OR.
Okay.
So that's like a new kind of benchmark record.
Yeah.
We were hovering around that for a while, but now it's sort of staying more consistently above that price. So if you're gonna be sort of in like the true core of downtown, expect that $1,000 a square foot is kind of, you know, if you're not looking more actively online, you just want to know an approximate ballpark. $1,000 a square foot in the true core of downtown is like pretty common in terms of what you're expecting to see, right?
Yeah.
There are neighborhoods where you can still get in the $750 a square foot would probably be pretty low, but in the $800 to $900 square foot range still definitely exists. But you need to be comfortable with maybe not being as close to a source of transit.
Right.
Maybe walking a little bit further, not as much infrastructure. Like in this neighborhood here, we're still under $1,000 a square foot.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, in the next couple of years, seeing this over $1,000 a square foot is definitely not going to be out of the question.
Would you mind sharing with us just kind of your perspective on the Toronto condo market in general? I know you were kind of giving us some statistics before we started shooting about the number of cranes.
Yeah, so I was listening to a podcast not too long ago with Brad J. Lamb, and he's one of the biggest builders downtown here. He does kind of like more luxury style buildings here. I don't know what level of government it is. They had implemented a rule where a certain percentage of any new buildings that are coming up need to be office or retail space. And office and retail space downtown can typically only be sold between like $600 and $700 per square foot. So that leaves that certain portion underpriced, whereas residential is usually being sold for, right now they're being sold for like $1,100 per square foot in some more luxury buildings, pre-construction, right? So that leaves the builder then with this discrepancy of a certain portion of their building, and they have no choice but to increase the prices for the residential portion, right? So what we're noticing is that a lot of builders just are backing down from building downtown because it gives them a bad rap. Everyone's like, oh, these builders are greedy, money-hungry guys. Everyone wants to make a profit, but they're actually having the rug kind of like pulled out from underneath them in terms of their profitability, and they have no choice but to increase prices to even remain profitable. Otherwise, they're donating to the city of Toronto.
And that's something I've been talking about a lot on my YouTube channel recently, is just the unintended consequence of government interference or government regulation. And so, you know, they may think that they're helping the community by forcing in that commercial or that office space, but there's these unintended consequences where the developer still needs to make his margins or they'll move on to the next project. Yeah,
so it basically leads us to, I think, two options. One is forced price increases because they have to do that, or two, a lack of inventory, which we kind of already have, but even more so. So Brad was basically saying cranes have gone from 130 cranes last year in the sky, and it still looks like we have a lot, but there was 130 last year and 70 this year and 50 projected for next year. So we are shrinking in terms of development. It looks like we have a lot going on, but those are kind of like pre-sold condos that were sold years ago.
True,
So we're really kind of at this standstill, and until there's some other implementation, I mean, maybe Doug Ford will do something. Who knows, right?
Interesting.
But I think that's my standpoint. Like that's where we're at right now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
So talking about pre-construction projects, another area I know nothing about. So what should someone know when they're getting into a pre-construction project?
I think that there's this kind of, I focus more on resale. I'm not as big of a proponent on the pre-construction side, but I do know a little bit about it. So my 2 cents and just my opinion on this is that the best deal to get in pre-construction is to get in the first phase. So they'll usually release their units in multiple phases. So a builder can't get full funding on a project. It needs to come incrementally from whoever the lender's going to be, right? They're not going to give them, I don't know how much it costs to create the building, but let's say $100 million. They're not going to be like, here's $100 million, good luck. They're going to be like, hey, we'll give you 30, and then once you reach whatever our requirements are, like any lending would be, when you get your mortgage approval, it's usually conditional on X, Y, and Z. So it's kind of the same thing for builders. Once you sell X number of units, you can start digging. Once you sell X number of units, you can do this, right? Like there's phases. So I personally think that the first phase of pre-construction, because I think pre-construction is a lot of speculation purchasing, right? But I think that if you're buying in the first phase of pre-construction, it's the least risky because the second and third phases are usually coming out at higher prices, so you're automatically getting that price jump and that appreciation based on the second and third phase. If you're buying in the third phase, you're typically paying resale prices in the third phase for a non-existent unit. I would rather buy something that I'm like, oh, if I'm going to pay the same price, I'd rather just get the thing now, right? So I think it's important for people to know that you could end up overpaying in pre-construction if you're buying in the last phase. And I think it's important for people to note that most pre-construction developments downtown here require 20% down. You can't do. There's very few that will allow you with 5%. But if you're going resale, at least for a first-time buyer, you can do 5% down. If you're going pre-construction, it's usually like 5% in the first week. Maybe like $5,000 and then 5% in the first week, and then another 5% in 90 days. It's a tiered deposit structure where your deposit is almost always. It's not hard and fast, but like almost always 20%.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming it's similar to when you buy a new house, but I'm curious to find out. When someone's looking at buying, say, a pre-construction condo, I'm assuming that you often can't resell it or assign it until the project's completed, or can you?
It's actually very common to see assignments happening here. But there's a relatively hefty fee to do so, right? Like a builder's going to charge you probably in the ballpark of $5,000 to assign your unit because they're basically saying like, you're kind of cutting my grass, right? Yeah. So there's a fee to do that. The other thing too is a lot of people like to sell on assignment here before they close because you have no mortgage at that point, right? So whoever holds the paper upon the condo registration is the person who needs to pay. So there's always development fees and levies here as well, right? So you're going to have to pay the builder, and they're pretty heavy here actually, to be honest, because the city's charging the builder a lot. I think in that same podcast, Brad was saying a 1-bedroom condo to the city, he has to pay $20,000 for a 1-bedroom.
Right.
They're increasing that fee by like 70%, he said. Oh, wow. So the development fees and levies for pre-construction, I imagine, are just going to continue to increase. But you're looking at, they'll usually set a cap for you when you're signing your paperwork and say, okay, your fees and levies are capped at 10 to $20,000 or whatever. Beyond your 20% down, there are other fees that you need to pay which don't go into your equity, which I'm not a huge fan of because you're actually starting behind the 8 ball. Whereas if you're buying resale and you're putting your money into it, at least it's equity in your condo, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. So is it essentially almost like most condo developments, you can resell them then? Because I'm just curious, because I know in London, Ontario, when you're looking at, say, a new subdivision, they'll be written into that purchase and sale agreement, essentially, that you can't sell until they've sold out all their phases. Because, like you said, they don't want you cutting their grass. It's my understanding that most do. I don't think all of them allow, but many do. Okay, interesting. Learn something new. There you go. So otherwise, if someone's looking at entering the Toronto condo market, any other tips, tricks, rules of thumbs that they should work with someone that knows what's going on, because there's often times where I've worked with clients who are like, oh yeah, my agent is from Markham that drives downtown, and if only just for the efficiency of knowing where lock boxes are and where the parking is, it's very helpful to have someone who knows what's going on downtown, because sometimes there's 200 lock boxes in a lockbox room and they don't tell you which one it is. There may not be visitor parking, so you might have to find someone who knows where to park downtown or how to get the parking. But you also want to work with someone who knows the buildings, because there are buildings downtown that I'm not going to name that are not good. Like I won't even show in them. Yeah, and so is that due to a tenant profile? Is that due to the construction? Builder issues, right? So we're talking like very heavy special assessments within the first 3 years. Oh, okay, yeah. People, the HVAC system for the entire building going in like the first 2 years, right? Which is, so there are builders that I'm not fond of. Yeah. There are particular buildings that I'm not fond of. So I think that working with someone in the condo downtown sector, at least with houses, there's obviously going to be better builders with houses and stuff like that. The components are relatively the same, whereas I find that even though condos are relatively the same, there can be a very big discrepancy between what's going to have good resale value and what may not have good resale value. So there's some downtown that I'm like, I wouldn't even touch that with a 10-foot pole. Yeah. So any tips for the audience if they're looking to find a realtor for condos? Like, what should you look for in a realtor?
Call me. No, just kidding. And for a realtor, someone that is experienced and someone that actually has your best interest at heart. Like, every time I sit down with my clients, I tell them I don't need anyone to buy a house with me tomorrow. It's okay. If you want to buy a house in 6 months with me, that's fine. If someone is trying to pressure you to buy a house with them literally every time that you're going out, I don't think that they necessarily have the best interest, your best interest at heart. They're looking for a paycheck.
Yeah, and I don't know what your experience is or exactly how it works here in Toronto, but I know something I mention to my audience often is if the moment you sit down with a realtor, they're trying to get you to sign that BRRRR, the buyer rep agreement, that's usually a bad sign that they got a lot of their interest at heart.
100%, yeah. So, I mean, my sort of sweet spot that I've figured out with my clients is I've also been burned by clients. So I also think
it can be frustrating.
Yeah, so I also think if your agent is not willing to even talk about the BRRRR, not asking you to sign it on the front end, but if they're not willing to even have that conversation with you, you need to be hesitant of their negotiation skills because they can't even convince you to be their client. How the hell do you think that they're going to get you a deal, right? So my sweet spot with my clients, and I bring this up at the beginning of every meeting, is I'm not going to ask you to sign anything with me today, nor would I ever sign anything with anyone because there's some clients that I wouldn't want to work with either. I do a 3 showing rule.
Okay.
So after the 3rd showing, you sign something with me. You have, and it's, we have a conversation at that point. Do I actually want to take you on as a client? Because I use it as a 2-way street. I'm not taking on every client. Not at all. But I use it as a 2-way street where it's like, is this working out for us? Okay, I've spent probably in the ballpark of 15 to 20 hours between research and this and that. After the 3rd showing, I expect a commitment at that point in time, but you're fully 100% cool to walk away from me before that. Like, I don't care. That's fine.
Actually, that seems very fair. And by that point in time, you kind of know each other's relationship and stuff, so I think that's, and kind of the cadence, so I think that that's what's really important.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So I think that that's a great point to wrap it up here, guys. If you enjoyed this video, smash the like button, hit the subscribe button if you're new to my channel, and otherwise, where can they reach out to you, Emma, if they want to
You can reach out to me at emma.pace@zoocasa, ZOOCASA.com, or on Instagram at paceofbase.
All right. Well, until next time, guys, remember, making money's a team sport. There's more than enough money in this world for us to all make it, but if we're not saving it, I mean, like, what's the point? Thanks. Bye.